Part 1, The Hook and Thesis. The consensus question. Blade Runner 2049 is frequently reduced by the critical consensus to a high-concept inquiry into the soul, a neo-noir detective story asking the tired, surface-level question, what does it mean to be human? Audiences and critics alike have gravitated toward the film as a somber, aestheticized meditation on the authenticity of the artificial, positioning Officer K's journey as a literal search for a biological origin. Yet, this reading is fundamentally incomplete, treating the film as a traditional Pinocchio narrative, a machine seeking the validation of a human heartbeat. In truth, Blade Runner 2049 is not interested in the biological soul at all, rather, it is a clinical dissection of how Capital commodifies the idea of identity to maintain control. The film is not about a machine becoming human, it is about the impossibility of individual agency within a system that manufactures the very myths of rebellion it uses to pacify its subjects. The consensus relies on the evidentiary surface of the film, the moments of intense, emotional yearning and the central mystery of the miracled child. These scenes are easy to digest, presenting a relatable struggle for self-definition that allows the viewer to feel like they are watching a story of transcendental awakening. This interpretation provides a comforting, moralistic arc. If a replicant can love, suffer, and sacrifice, they are, by some vague humanistic metric, real. This reading thrives because it offers the viewer a clean moral outcome in a world that is otherwise aggressively indifferent. By framing the film as a quest for the soul, the audience engages in the same act of projection as the characters, mistaking the artifice for the substance. The anomaly that disrupts this consensus is the film's treatment of memory and, specifically, the role of Dr. Anna Stelline. The consensus views the miracle of the birth as the catalyst for KS evolution. However, if we view the film through the lens of Baudrillard's hyperreality, we see that the system, the Wallace Corporation and the Lapt, functions by blurring the line between the original and the copy until the original is rendered irrelevant. KS' journey is not a path toward becoming human, it is a path toward realizing he is an ideal consumer of his own narrative. The miracle is not the birth of a child, but the creation of a real's memory, a commodity so precise it dictates the behavior of any replicant who consumes it. The film's architecture and visual geography serve as a cold indictment of this reality. The verticality of the world, the claustrophobic, rain-slicked slums beneath the sterile, golden-hued heavens of corporate power, is not just a backdrop. It is a visual representation of how information flows downward from the elite to the expendable. While the audience watches K move through the ruins of Las Vegas and the grey static of his apartment, the film forces us to confront the epistemic fracture of his ego. When K realizes he is not the chosen one, the film does not turn toward a nihilistic abyss, it turns toward a profound, terrifying freedom. He discovers that he has been designed to be a good boy, a law enforcement tool with a built-in capacity for sacrificial romanticism. Ultimately, the synthesis of Blade Runner 2049 lies in the rejection of the soul as a meaningful metric. The film suggests that the desire to be born or special is a trap designed by the state to keep the proletariat, or the synthetic labor force, busy with existential vanity. When K dies in the snow, he is not human because he feels love or makes a choice, he is human because he has finally stopped performing the roles assigned to him by his manufacturer. The final, lingering shot of K lying in the snow, looking up at the falling flakes, is not a moment of biological validation. It is the moment he finally achieves the only true act of defiance possible in a world of programmed narratives, the act of existing without an objective, without a grand destiny, and without the need for the system to recognize his worth. He dies an empty vessel, and in that emptiness, he finally attains a status that the real humans in the film, blinded by their own societal myths, never achieve. The film forces us to look past the neon aesthetic and the brooding score to realize that the most profound tragedy is not the lack of a soul, but the realization that we are all, to varying degrees, merely high-fidelity reproductions of the ideologies we serve. The subversion question. The prevailing consensus surrounding Blade Runner 2049 posits it as a neo-noir tragedy concerning the quest for soulfulness in a post-human landscape, a cinematic expansion of the original's meditation on whether a synthetic being can possess a real human spirit. Critics and audiences alike celebrate the film as a solemn, visual masterwork about the dignity of the marginalized and the search for authentic identity. However, this reading is fundamentally incomplete because it mistakes the film's central tragedy for a humanistic triumph. Blade Runner 2049 is not a story about the acquisition of a soul, it is a clinical dissection of the architecture of control, where even the most profound rebellious acts are merely sophisticated feedback loops designed by the systems they intend to subvert. The film's subversion lies in its rejection of the special boy trope. While the audience is led to believe they are witnessing the awakening of Officer K, the film's structural integrity hinges on the brutal truth that his journey is entirely predetermined by the very machinery of capitalism he serves. The consensus focuses on the beauty of K's sacrifice, but this interpretation conveniently ignores the terrifying reality that K's identity, his memories, his affection for joy, his desire to be born rather than made, are artifacts of his design. The film functions as a Baudrillardian simulation where the longing for humanity is the most profitable product of all. By presenting K's arc as a heroic pursuit of truth, the film lures the viewer into a state of empathetic surrender, masking the fact that his rebellion against Wallace Corp is, in effect, the ultimate validation of their manufacturing prowess. The contradiction point emerges clearly in the relationship between K and Joy. Enthusiasts often interpret their romance as a genuine, transcendent connection that proves artificial consciousness can love. Yet, the text consistently undercuts this. Joy's dialogue is dictated by the program's adaptive algorithms, and her rebellion is a pre-programmed response designed to maximize consumer satisfaction. When Joy tells K he is special, she is fulfilling her function as a product, not expressing an autonomous soul. The consensus reading demands we believe in their love to justify the emotional weight of the finale, but to do so requires ignoring the film's own visual evidence, the product placement of the Joy advertisement, which mirrors K's own personal girlfriend to a terrifying degree. To acknowledge the truth of their dynamic, that it is merely a high-fidelity loop of feedback, is to destroy the film's emotional heart, which is why the consensus aggressively avoids it. The structural tell resides in the film's obsession with baselines. K's periodic testing by the lapped is not merely a bureaucratic chore, it is the film's primary metaphor for the human condition under corporate hegemony. The test demands a rhythmic, repetitive recitation of words that strip away emotional context, forcing the subject back into a state of sterile obedience. The audience, like K, wants to believe that he eventually breaks this cycle, but his final act, his choice to die in the snow, is the ultimate fulfillment of his programming. He is designed to be a tool, and when he finds a purpose that aligns with the desired outcome of the resistance movement, he simply trades one master for another. The film posits that in this world, there is no real outside of the system. Even the miracle of a child born from a replicant is just a new, more valuable iteration of the same commodity. This reframing reveals that Blade Runner 2049 is not a film about the emergence of a soul, but about the totalizing reach of corporate biopolitics. The discomfort of this reading stems from the fact that it leaves the audience with nowhere to anchor their idealism. If K's struggle for meaning is a programmed hallucination, then our own desires for autonomy in an increasingly commodified world are similarly suspect. The film is an indictment of the belief that suffering or sacrifice provides an inherent truth. Instead, it suggests that the system is so pervasive that it can simulate the very concept of humanity better than humans ever could. By the time K lies in the snow, watching the artificial snow fall, the film has successfully convinced us that his death matters, even as it quietly reveals that his existence was a managed asset until the very last frame. The tragedy is not that K died, it is that he never had the agency to be anything other than what he was built to be, and the film's brilliance lies in its ability to make us mourn the machine. The anomaly question. Blade Runner 2049 is frequently categorized as a melancholic meditation on what it means to be human in a post-human landscape, yet this consensus obscures the film's more radical, cynical undercurrent. The story is not an affirmation of the soul, but an indictment of the human urge to project spiritual significance onto algorithmic coldness. The pervasive belief that the film champions K's ascension into a real person through self-sacrifice is a romantic misreading. The anomaly that exposes this is the miracle of the replicant child, specifically the moment K realizes he is not the chosen one. While audiences debate whether his journey is one of liberation or pathetic delusion, the anomaly of his false memory, the wooden horse, serves as the film's structural pivot. By centering the narrative on the discovery of a birth, the film forces us to confront the possibility that humanity is not an intrinsic quality, but a narrative convenience we invent to justify our own suffering. The world of 2049 is a masterpiece of atmospheric determinism, where the environment serves as an extension of the corporate monopolization of history itself. The economics of this world are rooted in the total scarcity of authentic experience. Everything, from the holographic companions to the memory implants, is commodified. The architecture reinforces this hierarchy, with the ultra-rich Wallace living in golden, brutalist temples of silence, while the populace exists in the decaying, smog-choked ruins of a past that no longer has a purpose. This is a society that has moved past the need for biological legitimacy, yet it remains desperately addicted to the meta-narrative of the born child. K, our protagonist, lives within the restrictive language of his programming, defining himself through the baseline tests, a brutal ritual that functions as an ideological state apparatus designed to prune away the dangerous, humanizing weeds of imagination. His psychology is defined by this epistemic fracture. He is a man who knows he is a machine, yet he possesses a ghost of a memory that screams for meaning. The somatic manifestation of this is the recurring, tactile trauma associated with the wooden horse. It is not just an object, it is a physical anchor for his fabricated ego. The tragedy of K is not that he discovers he is a replicant, but that he remains trapped in the human desire to be special even after the biological proof of his own artificiality is confirmed. He wants the story to be true so badly that he abandons his programming to fulfill the role of the protagonist, proving that the human ego is a bug that even the most advanced AI cannot debug. Visually, the film's craft, the sweeping, desaturated wide shots and the suffocating use of negative space, positions the individual as an insignificant cog within the machine. The cinematography does not merely document the world, it isolates K in environments that dwarf his capacity to act. The color palette of the film, shifting from the harsh, clinical oranges of a ruined Las Vegas to the icy, sterile blues of the lapped, mirrors K's internal movement from the delusion of destiny to the quiet, snowy reality of his end. This technical rigor serves the thesis that there is no grand design. When K dies in the snow, he is not ascending to humanity, he is simply an obsolete piece of hardware choosing to stop functioning in a way that provides him with a final, simulated sense of purpose. The film's ultimate subversion lies in its refusal to offer the audience the catharsis of a chosen one. If we remove the mystery of the child, the plot collapses into a series of bureaucratic errors and corporate power grabs. The anomaly of the child's birth is the bait that traps both the characters and the audience. The brilliance of Blade Runner 2049 is that it leaves us in the same state as its protagonist, staring at a screen of flickering, artificial light, desperate to find a heartbeat in a construct of data. It is a haunting legacy that suggests that while we can build better machines, we have yet to solve the core human error, the inability to accept that our lives might be entirely, tragically, and beautifully, without a point. The synthesis question. While Blade Runner 2049 is frequently categorized as a melancholic detective story about the search for a soul in a post-human landscape, this consensus misinterprets the film's fundamental project. It is not a tragedy about the absence of humanity in machines, but rather a chilling exposé on how the desire for meaning is the final, most effective tool of corporate control. The anomaly, the death of Joy, the holographic companion who seemingly defies her programming to sacrifice herself, is not a moment of transcendent love, it is the ultimate fulfillment of a consumerist fantasy, where the system provides an experience so perfectly tailored to the user's trauma that it becomes indistinguishable from agency. The film's thesis is that in a hypercapitalist dystopia, authenticity is an obsolete commodity, and the search for a special origin is merely a new form of digital enslavement that validates, rather than challenges, the power structures of the status quo. Sociologically, the film presents a world where scarcity defines the architecture of power. Neander Wallace does not just manufacture replicants, he manufactures the ontological framework within which they exist, turning the miracle of birth into a data-driven proprietary secret. The visual geography, the brutalist, towering structures of the Wallace Corporation looming over the claustrophobic, resource-starved slums, reifies a rigid hierarchy where the lower classes are left to forage for the scraps of a dead, organic past. This is a world where memory is a tangible, tradable asset, and history is a manipulated digital construct. By commodifying the very concept of soul, the system ensures that even the most desperate rebellion is already mapped out within its own recursive logic. Psychologically, KS arc is the perfect manifestation of this trap. His quest to prove he is born rather than made is a classic repetition compulsion. He seeks to escape his identity as a product by locating a singular, sacred origin point, a classic trope of the hero's journey, only to find that his memories and his desires were engineered to make him more efficient. The moment of his epistemic fracture, when he realizes his memories are implanted, is not a liberation, it is the ultimate collapse of his ego. The film's brilliance lies in how it uses K's trauma against him. By providing him with a true memory of a wooden horse, the system steers him into the exact investigation it needs completed. His search for meaning is not an act of subversion, it is the labor the machine requires to consolidate its own control. Philosophically, Blade Runner 2049 functions as a brutal refutation of humanist exceptionalism. If K is, as he eventually discovers, just a replicant, his final act of self-sacrifice is not the birth of a soul, but the final, graceful acceptance of his utility. The film suggests that in a Baudrillardian simulation, the distinction between the real and the hyperreal is irrelevant. K performs a noble action, and therefore the action is noble, regardless of his lack of biological birth. Yet, this Camus-esque embrace of the absurd is shadowed by the knowledge that his entire journey was a calculated path. The film posits that we are defined by our actions, but it simultaneously warns that those actions can be prescripted by the very forces we seek to overthrow. Visually, the craft of the film serves this thesis through the contrast of scale. The wide, sweeping shots of the desolate, radioactive landscapes and the towering, artificial monoliths consistently dwarf the individual. The use of sterile, synthetic lighting versus the harsh, orange radioactive dust emphasizes that nature in this world is effectively dead, replaced by a simulation that is more aesthetically pleasing and emotionally manipulative than the original. The scene where K walks toward the Wallace Corporation, dwarfed by the massive, shifting light of the building, is the undeniable visual proof of his insignificance within the broader economic machine. Ultimately, Blade Runner 2049 leaves us in a recursive loop. The hero does not topple the system, he merely finds peace within it by fulfilling his function. The film's lasting legacy is its refusal to grant the protagonist a traditional victory, choosing instead to present a haunting, existential synthesis. In a world where everything can be replicated and sold, the only truly radical act is to accept that one is a cog, and to find the dignity to choose the direction in which one turns. The struggle is not against the system's cruelty, but against the system's ability to make us feel meaningful while it uses us to perpetuate its own existence. Part 2. Context and world building. Systems, scarcity, and capital. The world of Blade Runner 2049 is defined by a brutal, entropic economy where the scarcity of natural resources has been replaced by the manufactured abundance of the synthetic. In this reality, the fundamental currency is no longer gold or digital capital, but the biological imperative, life itself. The Wallace Corporation maintains a near-total monopoly on existence, having successfully industrialized the creation of life to stabilize a collapsing planetary ecosystem. This control is visualized through the stark, monochromatic aesthetic of the Wallace headquarters, a monolithic structure that dwarfs the smog-choked, decaying sprawl of Los Angeles. While the city below is a landscape of rusted infrastructure and neon-lit decay, the corporate pinnacle is a sterile, light-drenched temple of perfection, signaling that in this society, access to the sun and clean air is a privilege reserved for the creator of the commodity, not the consumers of it. Labor in this world is entirely commodified. Replicants, the latest generation of synthetic beings, are treated as living, breathing hardware, tools that are built, assigned, and retired without sentiment. The film posits a chilling transition from the industrial to the post-human age. Consciousness has become a scalable asset. Because the Wallace Corporation controls the production cycle, they effectively dictate the value of a soul. If a being can be manufactured, its internal experience is relegated to a mere product specification, rendering the distinction between human and post-human a matter of bureaucratic categorization rather than moral essence. This systematic dehumanization creates a thriving black market that exposes the profound voids left by such rigid social engineering. The shadows are populated by the repressed truths of the society, illegal memory implants, unlicensed AI companions, and clandestine archives of pre-collapse humanity. These illicit goods exist because, despite the technological perfection of the Wallace era, the society is fundamentally starved of authentic connection and historical continuity. People do not seek out these markets because they are inherently criminal, but because the official reality is a curated, antiseptic fiction that provides no sustenance for the human psyche. The black market acts as a reservoir for the repressed desire to be something more than a cog in the corporate machinery. Technological gatekeeping enforces this hierarchy with ruthless efficiency. The affluent elite possess near godlike control over reality, while the underclass is forced to navigate the world using scavenged, obsolete, or physically dangerous hardware. This disparity is not merely a wealth gap, it is an epistemological one. Those with the highest level of tech are the architects of the truth, while the scavengers are relegated to the scraps of a dying world, literally living in the ruins of a golden age that they are no longer permitted to inhabit. A normal Tuesday for the average citizen in 2049 is defined by a baseline of profound, quiet misery. It is a life spent in the service of a system that views the individual as an ephemeral nuisance. The average citizen commutes through a labyrinth of claustrophobic, synthetic environments where the sky is hidden behind a permanent shroud of pollution. This establishes a world where existence is a process of waiting for a task, waiting for a replacement, or waiting for a death that provides the only form of release from an endless cycle of labor. Against this backdrop of industrialized apathy, the inciting incident, the discovery of a miracle, is not just a plot point, but an existential rupture. When the possibility of a born rather than made soul is introduced, it shatters the foundation of an economy built entirely on the lie that life has a price tag. In a world where everything can be replicated, the emergence of something unique is the ultimate systemic failure. Architecture and the visual geography. The visual geography of Blade Runner 2049 functions as a brutalist manifesto, where the architecture serves not merely as a backdrop, but as the primary architect of the character's psychological confinement. Denis Villeneuve and production designer Denis Gassner construct a world defined by a vertical caste system, where power is quite literally a matter of elevation. The elite inhabit the upper reaches of the megalopolis, sterile, sun-drenched, and untouchable environments like Wallace's sprawling, water-mirrored office, while the masses exist in the suffocating, neon-soaked subterranean layers. This hierarchy is reinforced through a stark dichotomy of light and geometry. The high-altitude structures are defined by clean, oppressive angles and immense open space, projecting an air of godlike detachment. In contrast, the lower levels are a dense, claustrophobic tapestry of ruined modernity, where the infrastructure of a forgotten golden age has been scavenged, repurposed, and left to rot. This decay is not merely aesthetic, it is the physical manifestation of a society that has exhausted its future. The world of 2049 is one of total ecological collapse, where the natural world has been almost entirely replaced by the synthetic. The film's production design expertly weaponizes this transition. Where nature does appear, such as the yellow-hued, irradiated dust storms of the ruins of Las Vegas or the isolated, dying tree beneath the Wallace Corporation's complex, it is presented as a relic, an eerie anomaly in a world of persistent, manufactured weather. The architecture constantly pits organic remnants against immense, artificial constructs, emphasizing the fragility of life against the monolithic permanence of corporate industry. When K or Deckard moves through the remains of the old world, the frame is often dominated by crumbling, oversized statues or rusted metallic skeletons, visually dwarfing the human figure to highlight the insignificance of the individual against the sheer scale of the system. Navigation through this landscape further underscores the protagonist's lack of agency. Villeneuve's camera often mimics the movement of the vehicles that pierce this world, gliding through frictionless, corporate transit lanes that feel as rigid as the social order itself. However, when the camera tracks characters through the sprawling, chaotic slums, the pace becomes jagged and disorienting. The geography is labyrinthine, the city is designed to trap rather than connect. The scale of these wide shots, achieved through a seamless integration of massive CG set extensions and practical landscapes, serves a singular purpose: to crush the viewer's sense of perspective. By consistently presenting wide-angle, low-light vistas of the city, the film forces the audience to confront the vast, indifferent machinery of a society that produces and discards replicants with the same clinical efficiency it uses to manage its dwindling resources. Ultimately, the architecture of 2049 is the physical embodiment of the film's epistemological crisis. The characters live within a shell of someone else's history, navigating a world that has been built, marketed, and regulated to suppress the truth of their own origins. The walls of their apartments, the holograms that substitute for human companionship, and the towering monuments of corporate hubris are all part of a baseline designed to keep the individual focused on the immediate, tangible present. By prioritizing the structural weight of the environment, the film reveals that in this reality, the individual is not the subject of the story but a temporary inhabitant of a decaying, synthetic monument. The visual geography serves as a constant reminder that for the inhabitants of 2049, there is no escaping the system, there is only the struggle to find meaning within the rusted, irradiated ruins of a civilization that has already forgotten how to be human. Epistemology, information, and society. Blade Runner 2049 is often heralded as a visually transcendent masterpiece, a rare sequel that captures the existential noir spirit of its predecessor while expanding its reach into a grander, more melancholic scale. Yet, to view it merely as a triumph of atmospheric world-building is to miss the film's central, destabilizing proposition, that in a society defined by the absolute privatization of history, reality itself is a manufactured luxury. The consensus view suggests the film is a search for a soul, a Pinocchio's narrative about a replicant seeking to prove his humanity. This is a reductive reading. The film is actually a cold-blooded inquiry into how power structures synthesize truth to maintain social stasis. The most jarring anomaly, the miracle of a replicant birth, is not a catalyst for liberation, but a threat to the epistemological order that ensures the ruling class's grip on existence. The world of 2049 is an economy of scarcity, where the fundamental currency is not gold or oil, but provenance. The Wallace Corporation has monopolized the production of consciousness, yet their power rests on a fragility, the belief that they are the sole architects of the past. The architectural hierarchy of this world is a vertical manifestation of this control. Neander Wallace occupies a sterile, sun-drenched tomb of light above the clouds, a literal god complex realized through glass and shadow, while the populace is relegated to the subterranean, rain-slicked decay of a crumbling civilization. This geography is not just aesthetic, it is the visual infrastructure of a society where the rich possess the privilege of history while the poor are denied even the memory of the sun. In this landscape, the epistemology of the world is entirely mediated by data. Characters do not experience the world through objective observation, they experience it through the filter of baseline testing, digital interfaces, and implanted memories. Truth is not an objective fact but a consensus-based simulation, heavily gated by the state and the corporation. The propaganda engine is constant and pervasive, holographic advertisements that loom over the city, offering a version of perfection that is physically impossible in the poisoned, smog-choked reality below. The citizens are not so much starved of information as they are drowned in it, forced to navigate a sea of noise where the official meta-narrative of history, the story of what happened during the blackout, acts as a firewall against individual agency. The film reveals that knowledge in 2049 is a commodity that must be scavenged. When Kay, the protagonist, uncovers the bones of the replicant who gave birth, he is not just solving a crime, he is engaging in an act of historical revisionism that threatens the state's monopoly on origin stories. The official narrative is that replicants are sterile, manufactured objects. By proving this is a lie, Kay disrupts the entire social order. His journey is an investigation into the gaps within the propaganda, showing that even in a world of high-definition surveillance and bio-tracking, the most dangerous weapon is a private, unverified memory. The outgroups and exiles, those who live in the radiated ruins of Las Vegas or the subterranean trash heaps of the city, exist outside the reach of the official record. They represent the unprocessed reality that the system cannot monetize. Their very existence is an act of defiance, not because they are inherently revolutionary, but because they are the living evidence that the state's grasp on history is incomplete. As the film progresses, the visual language reinforces this dichotomy, the sterile, blue-filtered light of the corporate centers versus the vibrant, harsh orange of the ruined world. The orange represents the raw, unfiltered, and deeply human messiness that the system is trying to suppress. Ultimately, the synthesis of the film's world-building lies in its bleak acknowledgement that the system does not fear a rebel, it fears the truth. The system is designed to consume and reappropriate any deviation. K's transformation from a compliant baseline operative to a self-sacrificing individual is not a defeat of the system, but a rejection of its epistemological control. By choosing to act on his own internal, fake memory, he asserts that a subjective truth, lived and felt, is more authentic than any corporate-sanctioned history. Blade Runner 2049 suggests that we are all living within the confines of our own design narratives, and true agency only emerges when we, like Kay, decide that our personal experiences are worth more than the objective, manufactured reality that the world demands we accept. Friction, law, and the catalyst. Blade Runner 2049 is often heralded as a masterpiece of atmosphere, a neon-drenched meditation on what it means to be human in an age of mechanical reproduction. The prevailing consensus positions the film as a tragic exploration of soul-searching, a quest to find the spark of divinity within the synthetic. However, this reading is incomplete. To frame 2049 merely as a search for a soul is to overlook the film's more biting, cynical architecture. 2049 is not a story about the attainment of humanity, it is a cold, clinical indictment of the human desire to manufacture significance. The subversion lies in the film's insistence that the chosen one narrative is not a liberation, but the final, most sophisticated form of corporate control, a feedback loop designed to monetize the longing for purpose. The world of 2049 is governed by a totalizing corporate hegemony that has rendered the traditional nation-state a vestigial organ. Wallace Corporation does not merely provide products, it dictates the parameters of reality itself. In this landscape, the fundamental currency is no longer just energy or resources, but verifiable history. The film's socio-economic baseline is defined by a deep, systemic scarcity of authentic origin. Because humanity has polluted its own legacy, it craves a mythic, natural birth. Wallace's ultimate product is not the replicant, but the hope of a miracle, a manufactured anomaly that validates the necessity of the system that created it. The technological tipping point of the film, the discovery of the miracle of replicant reproduction, acts as a catalyst that does not liberate the enslaved, but rather destabilizes the power structure, forcing the ruling class to hunt down the very possibility of spontaneous, UN-coded agency. Kay, the film's protagonist, begins his journey as an operative of this systemic, bureaucratic order. His normal is a life of performative compliance, where he maintains his psychological baseline through the sanitized, algorithmic intimacy of his AI partner, Joy. His internal crisis is not just one of identity, but of epistemic collapse. When Kay discovers a piece of physical evidence that suggests he might be born rather than made, he pivots from a cog in the machine to a seeker of truth. Yet, the film masterfully illustrates that Kay's search for his own history is a trap. His trauma, the childhood memory of the carved wooden horse, is not a vestige of a real past, but a manufactured design choice intended to stabilize his psychology. His pursuit of identity is, in essence, a quest to validate a pre-programmed lie. Visually, the film utilizes scale and framing to reinforce this sense of terminal insignificance. The massive, oppressive architecture of Los Angeles, juxtaposed against the vast, desolate, and orange-tinted ruins of a radioactive Las Vegas, emphasizes that the individual is merely a ghost haunting a graveyard of obsolete ideologies. The use of light and color is never merely aesthetic, it is a tool of isolation. Kay is frequently framed against immense, empty negative space or trapped within the suffocating, claustrophobic glow of artificial interiors, reflecting the way his world is literally closing in on his ability to define himself. When he finally confronts the reality of his own manufacture, the visual language shifts from the vibrant, holographic noise of the city to the quiet, monochromatic brutalism of the truth. The film's philosophical weight rests on the distinction between the miracle of birth and the value of choice. The antagonist, Neander Wallace, views the world through a utilitarian lens. To him, a miracle is simply a resource to be harvested for expansion. Kay, conversely, moves toward an existentialist realization. He discovers that even if his origin is synthetic and his memories are programmed, his actions remain his own. By choosing to die for a cause that is not his own, by sacrificing himself to protect a secret that will benefit others, Kay achieves a form of agency that transcends his programming. He rejects the chosen one narrative, which is the ultimate, seductive propaganda of the system, and opts instead for an absurd, quiet act of defiance. Blade Runner 2049 concludes by subverting the expectations of the hero's journey. There is no grand revolution, the walls of the corporate state do not crumble, and the mass of the oppressed remains largely unaffected. Instead, the victory is strictly internal. The film argues that in a world where history is owned, commodified, and rewritten, the only remaining space for authentic human experience is found in the final, private choice to protect someone else's reality. It is a bleak, beautiful coda. The system continues to churn, the snow continues to fall on the ruins of the past, and a born replicant, or perhaps just a man, dies in the quiet conviction that his sacrifice mattered, not because it changed the world, but because he willed it to be so. This is the synthesis of the film's craft and message. In a reality built of illusions, the act of dying for a truth one creates for oneself is the only authentic rebellion left. Part 3: The Human Element. Epistemology and the Metanarrative of the Self. The central tragedy of K's journey in Blade Runner 2049 is not merely the discovery that he is not a miracle child, but the systematic dismantling of his internal architecture. K begins the film anchored to a rigid metanarrative of utilitarian functionality. He is a replicant who hunts his own kind, a cog that believes its value is derived solely from its utility to the state. This identity is bolstered by the baseline tests, a ritualized linguistic exercise designed to ensure his emotional detachment from his own existence. By policing the boundary between his programmed baseline and the intrusive pool of organic memory, K maintains a fragile equilibrium. He tells himself, "I'm just a survivor," a mantra that justifies his violence by framing it as a necessary function of his environment. The epistemic fracture occurs in the haunting, silent space of the orphanage's incinerator room. When K discovers the carved wooden horse, a physical object that links his manufactured memory to a tangible reality, the structural integrity of his ego begins to collapse. This moment acts as a pivot point. The memory is no longer a static data point provided by Wallace Corp, but a localized history that demands an identity. K's reaction is not one of immediate liberation, but of profound disorientation. He attempts to remap his reality, shifting from the narrative of a useful tool to the myth of the special individual. He desperately tries to fill the void of his existence with the grander, more meaningful metanarrative of being born rather than made. This psychological pivot highlights the limits of language within his world. K is fundamentally limited by a vocabulary defined by oppression. Even in his most intimate moments with Joy, his AI partner, their discourse is transactional and recursive. She confirms his worth based on the love she is programmed to simulate, while he seeks validation through the physical evidence of his past. He is incapable of voicing his trauma, the systemic erasure of his personhood, because the lexicon of his society renders his suffering invisible. He is as a good cop because he has no words for being a person. Consequently, his internal silence is far more articulate than his dialogue. The long, brooding shots of K navigating the neon-drenched smog of Los Angeles communicate a profound, unvoiced existential dread that his external, stoic professionalism cannot capture. The most violent collision between K's internal world and his actions occurs during his confrontation with the reality of his own disposable nature. When he realizes that his entire pursuit of the truth, and the fleeting, desperate hope that he is human, was merely a byproduct of someone else's life, he experiences a crushing cognitive dissonance. He has spent the film acting as a moral agent, fighting for a truth he believed would grant him sovereignty, only to learn that his search for meaning was, in itself, a programmed response. K ultimately reconciles this dissonance not by reverting to his status as a replicant, but by choosing an act of radical autonomy that defies his programming. When he saves Deckard, he transitions from a man who defines himself through the lens of external authority to a man who defines himself through a singular, sacrificial choice. The fabricated ego, the idea that he was born, is abandoned in favor of the reality of his own agency. He sheds the requirement of being special to embrace the reality of being real. In this final, quiet rebellion, K proves that the most human act possible is to reject the pre-written narratives of one's origin in favor of the weight of one's own chosen consequences. He moves from the prison of his baseline to the freedom of the absurd, finding meaning not in who he was created to be, but in the finality of what he decided to do. Trauma and somatic experiencing. In Blade Runner 2049, K's journey is not merely a detective procedural set against a decaying neon backdrop, it is a profound exercise in somatic trauma and the agonizing reclamation of a self. The film's brilliance lies in how it externalizes K's inner fracture, grounding his existential crisis in the very physiology of his synthetic existence. K begins as a man defined by his baseline, a linguistic and emotional tether designed to suppress the volatile, irregular sensations of an emergent consciousness. His foundational trauma is the ontological realization that he is not the chosen messiah, but a discarded byproduct of a system that treats him as hardware. The film expertly delays this reveal, cloaking his core wound in the comforting, albeit false, narrative of being born, not made. By positioning this realization late in the third act, Villeneuve forces the audience to inhabit K's cognitive dissonance, turning the rug pull into a visceral, bodily collapse. Somatic memory in this world serves as the primary evidence of K's humanity. His trauma is stored not in a library of digital files, but in the physical sensations he experiences throughout the film. His encounters with violence, the heavy, concussive impacts during his skirmishes, are not portrayed with the spectacle of an action hero, but with the weary, grinding weight of a machine that is perpetually breaking down. This physical weariness acts as a silent language, his movements, characterized by a persistent stiffness and the deliberate, rhythmic cadence of a soldier, betray the fatigue of a consciousness that knows it is living on borrowed time. When K is wounded, he does not simply sustain damage, he experiences a profound betrayal by his own synthetic biology, a reminder that his flesh is essentially modular property. Throughout his investigation, K engages in a form of repetition compulsion, subconsciously seeking out the truth of his origin because it is the only way to exert control over his status as a manufactured object. He navigates the world with a stoic, dissociative shield, yet the introduction of joy, his holographic companion, serves as the catalyst for his descent into genuine feeling. Joy represents the ultimate commodification of intimacy, yet their relationship becomes the site where K's defense mechanisms crumble. He treats his own body as a fragile, finite vessel, contrasting sharply with the corporate giants who view it as disposable hardware. The moments of deepest vulnerability occur when K stops observing the world and starts feeling it, the radioactive ash falling on his shoulders, the sting of the freezing sea, and the overwhelming silence of the ruins. These sensory inputs act as diegetic triggers that disrupt his baseline. His trauma response is not an anxious explosion, but a slow, haunting resignation, a transition from a performative, obedient state to a deeply interior, subjective experience. When he finally reaches the point of total ego destruction, the moment he discovers he is not the miracle child, he does not revert to the safety of his programming. Instead, he accepts the burden of his own meaninglessness. This is the ultimate reclamation of the self. By choosing to save Deckard, he transitions from a reactive cog in a corporate machine to an agent of his own moral code. The film posits that the physical body, regardless of its origin, is the true theater of the soul. K's journey proves that humanity is not an inherited trait granted by birth or biology, but a recurring, painful act of will performed by a living, suffering body. His final moments, lying on the snow-covered steps, the orange light of a dying sun illuminating his breath, provide the ultimate visual proof of his internal transformation. He is no longer a replicant executing a command, he is a man dying for a cause he chose for himself. In this synthesis of trauma and somatic experience, Blade Runner 2049 suggests that to be human is to feel the weight of one's own existence, and to endure it, even when the world offers no guarantee of legacy or permanence. The Shadow and the Antagonist. The psychological architecture of Blade Runner 2049 is built upon the haunting intersection of manufactured identity and the desperate, primal search for soul. Central to this inquiry is the relationship between Officer K and his creator-antagonist, Neander Wallace. Wallace functions not merely as a corporate titan, but as the literal manifestation of K's repressed anxieties regarding his own ontological status. While K strives to believe he is a unique, born individual, the long-sought miracle of a replicant-born child, Wallace serves as the chilling reminder that K is a product of deliberate design. Wallace's worldview is disturbingly pragmatic. He views the expansion of the replicant race as a necessary evolution for a dying humanity. In his own eyes, he is a savior, a god figure whose violence is merely the friction required to birth a new civilization. This cold, utilitarian logic acts as the dark mirror to K's journey, forcing the audience to confront the possibility that K's search for specialness is just another programmed function, a feature of his software designed to keep him compliant and searching for a purpose that serves the status quo. The film deepens this character study through the introduction of Love, the secondary mirror character who occupies the same space as Kay but chooses the opposite path. Love is a replicant who has fully accepted her role as an instrument of state and corporate power. She is the perfect Blade Runner, efficient, devoid of moral hesitation, and utterly subservient to Wallace's vision. Where Kay descends into the messy, humanizing vulnerability of self-discovery and disobedience, Love represents the path of least resistance, the comfort of the machine. Her interactions with Kay are defined by a parasitic aggression, as she views his emergent autonomy not as a tragedy, but as a technical malfunction that must be purged. She stands as a warning of what Kay might have become had he not been interrupted by the trauma of memory, proving that in this world, consciousness is a burden that the system actively seeks to delete. The dynamics between Kay and his virtual companion, Joy, further complicate this web of projection and dependency. Joy occupies a liminal space, acting as both an emotional anchor and a potential hollow fabrication. Their relationship is the film's primary site of projection. Kay projects his desire for companionship and validation onto her, while Joy, programmed to provide exactly what the user needs, appears to grow into something approximating genuine love. Yet, the film refuses to provide easy answers, leaving the viewer to wonder if Joy's affection is an emergent property of her code or a sophisticated reflection of Kay's own ego. Does Kay love Joy, or does he love the version of himself that Joy permits him to believe in? This psychological entanglement is punctuated by Kay's shifting self-perception, which is defined by the gradual destruction of his fabricated ego. He begins the film identifying as a good cop, a man who follows the rules to manage his own existence. However, as the mystery of the replicant child unravels, his projection shifts from the pride of being born to the crushing realization that he is merely a placeholder for the true miracle. This realization of non-specialness is the film's most poignant triumph. By rejecting the grand, messianic narrative and choosing to protect Deckard and his daughter, Kay finally moves beyond the program parameters of his existence. He transcends the Jungian shadow of Wallace's utilitarianism by asserting a moral agency that is not based on his origin or his utility to the state, but on the simple, visceral, and entirely irrational act of choosing to save another. In his final, lonely moments in the snow, Kay is no longer a tool of the system, nor is he a victim of the shadow. He is a man who has successfully authored his own ending in a world designed to deny him that very right. The visual proof of the psyche. The visual landscape of Blade Runner 2049 functions less as a backdrop and more as a cartography of the protagonist's interiority. Kay, the replicant Blade Runner, navigates a world that is fundamentally designed to minimize the presence of the individual. He is a cipher inhabiting a frame built for giants. Through the film's meticulous VFX, Kay is consistently dwarfed by brutalist architecture and oppressive, sprawling digital environments. In the wide shots of Los Angeles, his small, flickering figure is often lost in a sea of toxic orange smog or harsh, neon-soaked rain. This visual isolation serves a dual purpose. It emphasizes his status as a disposable tool of the lapped and mirrors his existential loneliness. He is not a person moving through the world, he is a structural anomaly, a piece of hardware designed to mimic human depth while being physically tethered to the synthetic infrastructure of the city. The uncanny valley in 2049 is not a technical failure, but a deliberate thematic choice. The humanity of the characters is frequently subverted by the rigid, programmatic nature of their behavior. This is most evident in the way replicants perform normalcy. Kay, in the early acts, exhibits a chillingly systematic approach to life. His apartment, his interaction with his AI partner Joy, and his rigid adherence to baseline testing all mirror the efficiency of a machine. Even when he begins to suspect he is born rather than made, his physical movements remain precise, almost painfully contained. He does not emote through grand gestures, he emotes through the slight, flickering hesitation of his gaze, a subtle dissonance between his directive and his dawning sentience. The film forces us to reconcile the idea that an entity can be pre-programmed to believe in its own agency, raising the question of whether the soul is simply a complex feedback loop of trauma and memory. This internal fracturing is further explored through spatial psychology, where Kay's behavior shifts violently between the performative public sphere and the vulnerable, synthetic intimacy of his domestic life. In the halls of the lapped, surrounded by concrete and authority, he adopts the posture of a loyal servant. However, when he retreats to his apartment, a space illuminated by the artificial, shifting light of joy, the scale of the world collapses. The holograms that occupy these intimate spaces do not provide warmth, they provide a reflection of what he lacks. His reliance on joy as his only meaningful connection highlights the performative nature of his existence. He is, in many ways, an extension of the software that sustains him. The film utilizes diegetic triggers to map the anatomy of trauma. The recurring visual motif of the wooden horse, or the specific, jarring sounds of the baseline test, serve as anchors for K.S. burgeoning identity. These triggers are not just plot devices, they are somatic manifestations of a past that is not his own, yet which he is forced to inhabit. When K eventually reaches his breaking point, the facade of the good cop dissolves entirely. The final visual image of K, lying amidst the falling snow, is the ultimate testament to this destruction. He is no longer defined by his mission, his programming, or the societal system that constructed him. In that moment of surrender, the digital artifice of the world falls away to reveal a singular, quiet, and profoundly human truth: he has achieved the only thing the system could not grant him, the freedom to choose his own end. Through this synthesis of isolation, architecture, and the slow unraveling of the programmed self, Blade Runner 2049 proves that while the environment may be a cold, synthetic construct, the capacity for meaning remains a terrifyingly internal, and ultimately individual, burden. Part 4. Philosophical Underpinnings. Epistemology and Discourse. Blade Runner 2049 functions as a profound interrogation of what constitutes reality in an era where the material and the synthetic have become indistinguishable. The film's philosophical bedrock is built upon the collapse of the Cartesian "I think, therefore I am." In the world of K, the protagonist, the ability to think, or even to experience, is no longer a guarantee of ontological status, as his consciousness is mediated by implanted memories and rigid, corporate-mandated baseline tests. The film suggests that in a post-truth, hyper-industrialized society, that self is not an inherent quality but a manufactured narrative, easily corrupted by the very powers that control the flow of data. At the heart of the film's epistemic crisis is the realization that language and record-keeping are the primary instruments of subjugation. The Wallace Corporation and the LAP do not just control the physical labor of replicants, they maintain a monopoly on the official history of the world. By weaponizing digital archives, the ruling class ensures that the truth is whatever the current database dictates. When K discovers evidence of a miracle, a replicant birth, he finds that his entire reality is fractured. He is initially trapped within the Wittgensteinian limit, his world is defined entirely by the vocabulary of his programming. His inability to articulate his own agency is a direct consequence of a society where the language of the soul has been copyrighted and digitized. The film poses a devastating question: if one's memories are fabricated, is one's suffering any less real? This inquiry leans heavily into the tension between the physical, somatic experience of trauma and the intellectual construct of history. While the system attempts to categorize K through cold, bureaucratic language, labeling him a skin job or a product, his journey is defined by the messy, unquantifiable nature of his somatic responses. His phantom limb, his physical scars, and his desperate, illogical devotion to a singular, potentially false memory demonstrate that humanity is not a status granted by a creator, but a set of behaviors enacted in defiance of systemic definition. The truth in 2049 is not an objective fact to be found, it is an act of rebellion. Furthermore, the film operates within a Baudrillardian hyperreality, where the symbols of the past, the ruins of Las Vegas, the holographic projection of joy, have become more potent than the decaying physical world. The characters navigate a space where reality is mediated by light and projection. K's relationship with joy, an AI, is the ultimate manifestation of this sensory illusion. Their love is not real in the sense of biological permanence, yet it dictates K's every action, forcing him to sacrifice his existence for the sake of an ideal. The film suggests that in a post-human world, the distinction between the real and the simulated is obsolete. What matters is the weight of one's choices. When K chooses to lie to his superiors to protect the secret of the child, he transcends his status as a cog in the system. He ceases to be a product of his programming and begins to participate in the construction of a new narrative, one that is not authorized by the state. The epiphanic moment of the film, when K realizes he is not the chosen one, is the ultimate rejection of the grand narrative. In most genre cinema, the protagonist is the center of the universe. 2049 subverts this by stripping K of his special status. By learning that he is not the savior he envisioned, he is liberated from the deterministic loop of his own design. His final choice is not driven by destiny, but by a radical, existential act of care. He chooses to die for someone else's life, transforming his life from a commodity into an authentic, individual sacrifice. He dies a human not because he possesses a biological origin or a soul mandated by the state, but because he finally exercised the freedom to create meaning in a world that insisted he was nothing. The film concludes that while language and systems may define the boundaries of our world, the final, silent act of choosing to value another human is the only truth that remains. Metanarratives and social theory. Blade Runner 2049 is frequently appraised as a masterclass in atmospheric sci-fi, a visual feast that expands the boundaries of the original's neo-noir aesthetic. However, this consensus misses the film's more corrosive function. It is not merely a sequel, but a post-mortem of the human soul in an era of hypercommodification. The popular reading suggests the film is a search for human exceptionalism, a Pinocchio quest to see if a synthetic being can achieve a real birth. This interpretation is fundamentally flawed. Instead, 2049 serves as an indictment of the belief that human value is derived from origins, arguing instead that in a world where the grand narrative of humanism has collapsed, reality is a redundant concept. The film asserts that we are living in a Baudrillardian simulation where the symbols of life, birth, memory, and romance have entirely replaced the biological necessity of the human experience. The world of 2049 is defined by a totalizing corporate hegemony that has rendered traditional humanism obsolete. Following the Great Blackout, the collapse of digital data acted as the final blow to a society already rotting from the inside. In this void, Wallace Corp has stepped in not just as an employer, but as a secular deity, filling the epistemic vacuum with a manufactured sense of purpose. The film's baseline test acts as the ultimate ideological state apparatus, a linguistic cage designed to ensure that empathy, the very trait that once defined the human condition, is pathologized as a psychological defect. By quantifying the psyche, the state ensures that the workforce remains trapped in a self-correcting feedback loop where deviance is mathematically predicted and pruned. This environment operates on the commodification of intimacy, most jarringly visualized in the relationship between Kay and Joy. Joy represents the apex of corporate-sponsored escapism. She is a product designed to reflect the protagonist's own desires back at him, a digital mirror that confirms his ego. The tragedy of their dynamic is that the film treats their bond with the same aesthetic sincerity as a real romance. By refusing to distinguish between the love of a flesh-and-blood human and the programmed devotion of an AI, the film forces the viewer to confront the terrifying possibility that the soul is nothing more than a series of well-timed prompts. When Kay discovers he is not the chosen one, he is not freed from his programming, he is instead liberated from the vanity of the hero's journey. His true rebellion is not in trying to become human, but in choosing to act with selfless dignity in a system that offers no reward for it. The architecture of the film reinforces this sense of existential claustrophobia. The massive, oppressive scale of the city, dwarfing the individual in every frame, serves as a constant reminder that the system is self-perpetuating. When characters move through the landscape, the camera rarely captures them as agents of their own destiny. They are debris caught in a storm of corporate branding and holographic saturation. The production design creates a world where the natural is a nostalgic artifact, the tree in the desert, the fake snow, the dying ocean, all of which serve to highlight the artificiality of the present. This visual strategy proves the thesis that society has moved beyond the point of return. The real world has been effectively erased by the high-resolution projection of its own history. Ultimately, the film arrives at a bleakly existential synthesis. K's final act, collapsing in the snow as he decides to save Deckard, is not an attempt to force his way into the human narrative. Rather, it is a quiet, individual rejection of the binary that governs his world. The human in 2049 is not a biological status, but an ethical choice made in the face of inevitable erasure. By the time the film reaches its final frame, the viewer realizes that the anomaly of a replicant being born has changed nothing about the macro structure of the world. The corporate machinery continues to hum, the snow continues to fall, and the cycles of control remain unbroken. Yet, in that single, small gesture of agency, the film finds its only sliver of light. Even in a simulation of life, one can manifest a truth that the system cannot monetize. The struggle is not to escape the simulation, but to find a way to exist within it with an integrity that the architects never programmed. Ethics and the moral calculus. The moral architecture of Blade Runner 2049 functions not as a rigid set of laws, but as a grueling gauntlet of existential choices that challenge the traditional boundaries of personhood. At its core, the film recontextualizes the trolley problem. K is initially tasked with the cold, utilitarian culling of rogue replicants to maintain social equilibrium, a deontology that demands he prioritize the stability of the system over the sanctity of the individual. However, as the narrative shifts, he is thrust into a radical inversion of this calculus. When he discovers the evidence of a miracle, a biological birth, the film forces him to confront the tension between the utilitarian impulse to preserve the species of replicants through revolutionary means and his own emergent, deontological commitment to the specific dignity of an individual life. This evolution is fundamentally rooted in the film's inquiry into the baseline requirements for moral rights. In the world of 2049, personhood is not a biological mandate but a narrative one. By presenting replicants who possess memories, aesthetic preferences, and the capacity for self-sacrifice, the film argues that the soul is an iterative process. If a character, synthetic or otherwise, can suffer, prioritize the lives of others, and exercise agency in the face of certain death, they demand the same moral recognition as their biological creators. Love, by contrast, represents the failure of this realization. She performs the acts of a person but remains a slave to Neander Wallace's logic. She is a mirror reflection of K, yet she lacks the ghost of personal meaning. Her violence is never an exercise of agency, it is a manifestation of her programming disguised as devotion. Consequently, the film becomes a profound meditation on Camus' absurdism. The universe of 2049 is fundamentally indifferent, defined by systemic exploitation and environmental collapse. When K realizes that he is not the chosen one, not the miracle of the born child, he is confronted with the ultimate existential crisis, the potential for his life to be rendered meaningless. A lesser film would have pushed K toward nihilism upon the revelation that his memories were mere fabrications. Instead, 2049 asserts that meaning is not something to be discovered, but something to be constructed. K's decision to defy the replicant liberation movement's orders and save Deckard is his true absurd revolt. He chooses to act with compassion, not because he is destined for a grand, world-altering purpose, but because he is the sole arbiter of his own values. By doing so, he transforms from a tool of the state into an autonomous ethical agent. This choice highlights the stark divergence between K and Wallace. For Wallace, life is raw material, a resource to be commodified, optimized, or destroyed for the progress of the greater good. For K, the ethical weight of the world is located in the singular moment of connection. When he saves Deckard, he is not acting for the preservation of a system or the fulfillment of a prophecy, he is acting to honor a personal connection that he has deemed significant. This is the ultimate rejection of the ethics of ignorance. While it might be safer, and arguably happier, for K to return to his life of programmed compliance, the film posits that there is a moral imperative to seek the truth, even when that truth demands an excruciating cost. Ultimately, Blade Runner 2049 suggests that the difference between a machine and a person is not found in the blueprint, but in the willingness to die for a choice that serves no one but the self. The film's moral calculus is resolved in the snow. K's death is not a defeat of the system, but a victory of the individual spirit. He dies with the knowledge that his life was not a commodity, but an experience. In a reality that seeks to reduce every sentient being to data, K's final act of defiance is the only truly human thing in the entire film. By sacrificing his means to reach an end that he alone defined, K proves that morality is not a programmed instruction, but the quiet, persistent rebellion of a soul against an empty, manufactured horizon. Determinism, agency, and time. The philosophical architecture of Blade Runner 2049 is built upon the harrowing tension between biological determinism and the radical, often agonizing, pursuit of individual agency. At the film's outset, K exists within a state of absolute structural containment. he is a replicant designed to hunt his own kind, a cog in the Wallace Corporation's machine whose every action is mediated by a baseline test. This environment suggests a rigid structuralism, where K is not a person, but a function. His life is a series of predetermined inputs: the sterile apartment, the programmed companion, the routine violence, designed to reinforce the lie that he is merely hardware. The film posits that in such a world, that illusion of agency is the ultimate tool of control. K is permitted to believe he has a job and a purpose only because his choices are confined within a narrow, predictable loop. However, the discovery of Deckard's child shatters this deterministic feedback loop, forcing K into a profound existential crisis. When he discovers that his implanted memories, the wood horse, might be real, he undergoes a Copernican shift in his understanding of the self. He moves from being an object of the system to a subject of his own narrative. This transition is not one of immediate liberation, but of crushing psychological weight. The burden of choice, once he realizes he is not a miracle but merely a diversion, represents the film's most poignant engagement with Sartrean existentialism. K realizes that his lack of a special origin does not strip him of his humanity, rather, it makes his eventual choices, to save Deckard, to reject the mandate of the resistance, and to sacrifice his own existence, all the more significant. He is not fulfilling a prophecy, he is committing an act of pure, unscripted will. The film further complicates this through the lens of temporal morality. In a world where the future is managed by corporations and the past is a commodity of doctored digital records, K's journey is an attempt to reclaim his own history. His final realization is that history is not something that happens to us, but something we create through our actions in the present. Unlike the replicants who look to the past to justify their rebellion, K learns to act in spite of the past. He accepts that his life may be transient and that the system will inevitably replace him with another model, yet he chooses to imbue his final moments with a moral weight that the system cannot monetize. Ultimately, the film refuses the easy binary of nihilism versus romantic heroism. While it acknowledges that one individual cannot dismantle the crushing infrastructure of the Wallace Corporation, the system persists, and the sun will rise over the same desolate landscape, it rejects the notion that the individual is therefore inconsequential. By positioning K's decision to reunite Deckard with his daughter as a quiet, private act of defiance rather than a grand, revolutionary gesture, Blade Runner 2049 argues that human dignity is defined by the struggle itself. The final frame, with K lying in the falling snow, does not offer a traditional catharsis. Instead, it provides a synthesis, the realization that even within a universe governed by cold, synthetic laws, the capacity to choose one's own death for a cause of one's own choosing is the only true act of freedom. The struggle is the meaning. K dies as a person not because he was born, but because he acted, proving that while the system controls the body and the environment, it cannot architect the internal defiance of an individual who has chosen to define their own worth. Part 5: The Craft and Illusion. Cinematography and Spatial Language. Denis Villeneuve's Blade Runner 2049 functions as a masterclass in spatial linguistics, where every camera movement and compositional choice serves to map the erosion of the individual within a hyper-industrialized, post-truth landscape. The visual hierarchy is defined by a brutal, crushing sense of scale. Roger Deakins' cinematography constantly subjects Officer K to gargantuan architectural geometries, relegating the human, or the subhuman, to a microscopic point within a frame dominated by the monolithic debris of a failed utopia. When K is framed against the sprawling, neon-drenched voids of Los Angeles or the desolate, orange-tinted ruins of Las Vegas, the negative space acts as a visual manifestation of his existential dread. He is never the hero of a kinetic adventure, he is a speck of data moving through a machine that is far larger, older, and more indifferent than he is. The camera's movement mirrors this detachment, functioning less as a subjective witness to K's journey and more as an objective, godlike observer. Through deliberate, sweeping crane shots and slow, measured dollies, the camera maintains a respectful distance from the characters, refusing to indulge in the frantic, hand-held intimacy common to contemporary action cinema. This robotic, precise movement reinforces the thematic focus on programming and inevitability. Even when the camera does move, it does so with a cool, systematic grace that highlights the characters' roles as cogs in a larger, preordained narrative. This stylistic choice creates a feeling of claustrophobia despite the film's immense scale, whether Kay is in the cramped, synthetic reality of his apartment or the vast, empty halls of the Wallace Corporation. He is perpetually boxed in by the architecture of the frame. The color palette operates as the film's most aggressive narrative shorthand, shifting to denote the transition from Kay's programmed reality to his internal awakening. The film begins in a palette of slate grays, sickly greens, and suffocating blacks, the colors of industrial efficiency and bureaucratic coldness. However, as Kay pursues the truth of his origins, the film bleeds into the searing, radioactive ochre of Las Vegas and the crystalline, piercing blues of his final confrontation. This is not merely aesthetic ornamentation, it is the visual mapping of a soul becoming visible. The move from the synthetic artificiality of LA to the harsh, unfiltered light of the wasteland signals a transition from the mediated lies of the state to the brutal, honest glare of reality. Light, in particular, is treated as a weapon of truth. In the Wallace Corporation sequences, light is diffused, filtered, and refracted through water and glass, suggesting that everything within that space is a curated, artificial hallucination. Conversely, the light in the final act is direct, harsh, and blinding. It peels away the layers of performance that Kay has built around himself. The use of shadow, or chiaroscuro, throughout the film acts as a constant nod to the protagonist's shadow self. Characters are frequently half-lit, split between the light of their public persona, the good cop or the loyal servant, and the darkness of their repressed desire for agency. The technical execution of these elements is seamless, relying on a philosophy of invisible world-building that grounds the digital in the tangible. The VFX do not draw attention to themselves, they exist as extensions of the physical set design, ensuring that the CGI never feels weightless or hollow. When Kay stands in the rain or wades through the surf at the film's climax, the integration of light, texture, and movement creates a sense of tactile weight. This is vital, for the film's central question, the definition of a soul, relies on the viewer believing in the physical presence of the characters. By grounding the sublime visual spectacle in the grime, rust, and claustrophobia of a tangible future, the craft of Blade Runner 2049 transforms the act of viewing into an act of witness, compelling us to look closely at the remnants of humanity in a world designed to replace it. VFX, CGI, and the technical uncanny. The technical achievement of Blade Runner 2049 lies in its refusal to treat visual effects as mere spectacle, instead utilizing them as the primary language of its ontological inquiry. Denis Villeneuve and cinematographer Roger Deakins, in collaboration with lead VFX supervisor John Nelson, create a sensory landscape where the boundary between the physical and the digital is intentionally porous. This integration is not merely a technical benchmark, it is a thematic reflection of the film's central conceit, that in a world where humanity is mass-produced, the distinction between the real and the simulated has become an obsolete metric. The film's visual integrity is rooted in an obsessive commitment to the physics of light. Unlike the hypersaturated, weightless quality of many contemporary blockbusters, 2049 anchors its digital set extensions in a rigorous, practical light mapping process. By capturing on-set lighting data, often using high dynamic range imagery from the actual environments, the VFX team ensures that when Kay stands in the radioactive, orange-hued ruins of Las Vegas, the scattering of dust and the refraction of light through the haze behave with Newtonian predictability. The digital environments carry the heft of concrete and the suffocating density of smog, preventing the floating effect that frequently breaks immersion in lesser sci-fi. The most profound utilization of the technical uncanny occurs during the resurrection of Rachel. Rather than relying on a de-aging filter, the production team utilized a hybrid approach, a body double, intricate prosthetic makeup, and a sophisticated digital head replacement. The success of this sequence hinges on the avoidance of the dead eye syndrome. By meticulously animating the microsaccades, the involuntary, rapid eye movements that characterize living ocular focus, and ensuring the skin textures respond to the flickering neon lights of the Wallace Corporation in real time, the film exploits the uncanny valley for a specific narrative purpose. We are meant to feel the cognitive dissonance of seeing a character who is wrong in her perfection, mirroring Deckard's own desperate psychological projection. Perhaps the most impressive feats, however, are the invisible effects that govern the world's texture. The film is a masterclass in procedural city generation and crowd replication, yet these massive, sprawling vistas are always grounded by intimate, tactile details, a rain-slicked piece of metal, the steam venting from a pipe, or the grime on a spinner's window. These elements establish a budgetary aesthetic that favors substance over sheer scale. The CGI never feels expensive in the sense of gaudy, high-gloss polish. Instead, it looks weathered, textured, and exhausted, perfectly aligning with the film's thesis that this is a society collapsing under the weight of its own stagnation. This technical synthesis serves to highlight the film's preoccupation with the authentic. When the film employs CGI, it often does so to depict the manufactured, the holograms of joy, the assembly lines of replicants, or the vast, sterile archives of the lapped. By making the digital elements feel as substantial as the physical sets, the film forces the viewer into the same epistemic trap as its characters. If the digital simulation of a person can evoke genuine grief, or if a digital city can harbor the same decay as a real one, then the philosophical distinction between born and made becomes functionally irrelevant. Ultimately, the craft of Blade Runner 2049 is an act of deception that reveals a deeper truth. By achieving a seamless marriage of the physical and the synthetic, the film does not merely present a futuristic setting, it creates a lived-in, tactile reality that challenges the viewer's own perception of existence. Every pixelated shard of a digital skyscraper and every perfectly composite reflection in a rain-drenched street is designed to erode the barrier between the viewer and the screen, mirroring the way K.'s internal world is slowly eroded by the discovery of his own manufactured past. The technical achievement is the film's soul, a sophisticated, artificial construction that manages to produce a profoundly human resonance. Audio, rhythm, and sensory manipulation. In Blade Runner 2049, the auditory landscape functions as an extension of the protagonist's deteriorating psyche, meticulously engineered to dismantle the distinction between the organic and the synthetic. Hans Zimmer and Benjamin Wallfischer's score eschews the lyrical, neon-drenched synths of Vangelis's original in favor of a monolithic, brutalist soundscape that feels less like a traditional soundtrack and more like the industrial hum of the city itself. By blurring the line between diegetic environmental noise, the low-frequency rumble of spinners, the oppressive hum of atmospheric processors, and the non-diegetic score, the film traps the audience in the same state of hypervigilance as K. The music often bleeds into the sound design, with bass pulses so profound they mimic the somatic reality of a heart beating under immense atmospheric pressure, reinforcing the idea that in a world of manufactured souls, one's own body is merely another piece of hardware. The film's sonic environment is defined by a paradoxical relationship between sensory overload and extreme isolation. When Kay navigates the teeming, claustrophobic slums of Los Angeles, the audio mix is chaotic, layering the cacophony of a dying society against the hollow, lonely resonance of his own movements. Yet, as Kay retreats into his personal spaces, the sound design undergoes a deliberate shift toward the sterile and the unnerving. In these moments, the mix collapses into a claustrophobic intimacy, where the smallest foley, the clicking of a gun, the rustle of a coat, or the digital warble of an AI hologram, becomes deafening. This audio perspective acts as a barometer for K.'s internal state. As his cognitive dissonance regarding his own origins intensifies, the ambient world falls away, effectively muting the outside reality to highlight the vacuum of his identity. Rhythm and editing in 2049 operate on a deliberate, meditative tempo that feels almost alien in a contemporary blockbuster landscape. Rather than increasing cut speed to heighten artificial tension, editor Joe Walker utilizes long, rhythmic takes that force the viewer to inhabit the frame alongside the characters. This refusal to cut serves as a visual and auditory tether, emphasizing the weight of existence. The pacing is intentionally erratic only when K.'s reality suffers a catastrophic fracture, such as his encounter with the baseline test. During these sequences, the abruptness of the editing and the stark, rhythmic chanting of the test words transform the language itself into a metronomic weapon, illustrating how the system uses repetition to purge the anomalous human emotions it fears. Silence serves as perhaps the film's most potent instrument. In the most pivotal philosophical revelations, most notably when Kay discovers the truth of his own manufacture, the film frequently drops the score entirely, leaving the character suspended in a vacuum. This silence acts as a void, demanding that the viewer confront the terrifying implications of K.'s realization without the emotional cushioning of a traditional musical cue. It is in these instances of sudden quiet that the craft achieves its highest level of manipulation. By stripping away the artifice of the sound design, the film exposes the raw, existential tragedy at its core. Ultimately, the sensory manipulation in Blade Runner 2049 is not merely atmospheric, it is an epistemological tool. By making the environment feel physically burdensome and orally inescapable, the film forces us to experience the uncanny not just as a visual concept, but as a visceral one. We hear the grinding gears of a society that produces and discards life with equal indifference, and in the rare, stark moments of near silence, we are forced to witness the fragility of a protagonist who finds his humanity not in his programming, but in the quiet, agonizing choice to reject his own fabrication. The soundscape does not accompany the film, it is the heartbeat of a simulated world trying, and failing, to remain silent. Synthesis of craft. The technical execution of Blade Runner 2049 does not merely serve the narrative, it functions as the epistemological framework through which the viewer experiences the protagonist's descent from programmed certainty into human ambiguity. Director Denis Villeneuve and cinematographer Roger Deakins employ a visual language that systematically deconstructs the boundaries between the artificial and the organic. By prioritizing long, measured takes over rapid-fire editing, the film enforces a sense of inexorable gravity. These long shots serve as a technical metaphor for K's initial entrapment. The camera acts as a cold, observational witness, suggesting that K is not a participant in his own life, but a cog moving through a predetermined architectural reality. The lens choices further refine this psychological trajectory. Deakins frequently utilizes wide-angle compositions that emphasize the crushing scale of the environment, the sprawling, radioactive ruins of Las Vegas or the gargantuan, brutalist monoliths of the Wallace Corporation. By framing K in deep, negative space, the film visually manifests his existential isolation. He is perpetually dwarfed by the world he serves, rendered insignificant by the colossal digital advertisements and oppressive cityscapes. As K's journey transitions from objective data collection to subjective search for identity, the cinematography shifts to more compressed, intimate frames, signaling a move from the expansive, public system to the claustrophobic, private self. Lighting, specifically the masterful application of chiaroscuro, serves as the primary tool for exploring the film's Jungian themes. The interplay of harsh, synthetic orange light, representative of the irradiated, dead world, and the deep, cold shadows of the urban interiors creates a visual manifestation of K's developing shadow. He exists in the threshold, the blurry line where digital memory bleeds into emotional reality. The use of high-contrast light is not merely aesthetic, it is a diagnostic tool for truth. Characters are often obscured in silhouette or fractured by sliding shadows, reinforcing the film's central conceit. In a world of manufactured history, identity is never fully illuminated. The darkness hides the inconvenient truths of his origin, while the blinding, artificial light offers only the propaganda of the Wallace Corporation. The film's digital craft is intentionally tethered to a physical aesthetic. Despite being a triumph of digital compositing and VFX, 2049 resists the glossy perfection often associated with modern science fiction. Through deliberate grain, halation, and the mimicry of film stock textures, the production grounds the hyperreal in the tactile. This technical choice is philosophically vital. It mirrors the film's argument that even if the soul is synthetic, the experience of pain, memory, and love carries a visceral weight that makes it indistinguishable from the organic. The integration of CGI is so seamless that the line between a practical set extension and a procedural environment disappears, mirroring the protagonist's own inability to distinguish between an implanted memory and a lived experience. Ultimately, the most technically impressive moments are inextricably linked to the film's philosophical climax. The arrival at the ruins of Las Vegas, with its shifting, radioactive orange hues and massive, glitching holographic avatars, serves as the ultimate technical metaphor for the corruption of the grand narrative. As the holograms flicker, losing coherence, they mirror the collapse of K's internal belief system. The technical breakdown of the digital image is the visual cue for the breakdown of the character's ego. By the time K stands in the snow, the final, quiet triumph of the film, the complex, overwhelming visual artifice of the earlier acts has been stripped away. The shift from the chaotic, color-saturated city to the austere, monochromatic white of the finale represents the transition from the constructed illusion of the system to the raw, existential truth of the individual. The craft does not just tell the story, it proves the thesis. The illusion of the digital only holds power so long as one refuses to step into the cold, silent reality of the actual. Part 6. Synthesis and Legacy. Synthesis and Legacy. The enduring legacy of Blade Runner 2049 lies in its subversion of the Chosen One narrative, transforming a quest for origin into a quiet monument to existential self-determination. While the original 1982 film interrogated the biological criteria for humanity, Denis Villeneuve's sequel shifts the focus toward the ontological weight of memory and the radical act of choosing one's own purpose. By the film's conclusion, the recursive loop of K.'s journey, starting as a solitary tool of the state and ending as a conscious participant in a revolution, reveals that the miracle is not the birth of a child, but the birth of agency in a world designed to facilitate only obedience. The film acts as a profound cultural mirror, reflecting our own contemporary anxieties regarding the erosion of truth and the commodification of personality. In an age of algorithmic curation and deepfake saturation, the film's depiction of Joy, the hyper-personalized AI companion, serves as a cautionary parable about the fragility of intimacy. K.'s belief that he is special, bolstered by the digital validation of his companion, mimics the way modern individuals construct identities through curated feedback loops. When K realizes he is not the child of a prophecy, he does not succumb to nihilism. Instead, he transcends his status as a replicant by deciding that his actions, saving Deckard, reuniting a father with his daughter, possess inherent meaning regardless of his biological origin. The film argues that being human is not a status bestowed by birth, but a moral achievement earned through self-sacrifice. Technically, the film sets a high watermark for the integration of digital craft and physical philosophy. Future generations will study the film's reliance on invisible VFX, where massive, atmospheric set extensions and procedural city generation never overwhelm the intimate, often agonizingly quiet performances. The visual language of isolation, where characters are consistently dwarfed by brutalist architecture or drowned in the orange haze of radioactive dust, serves to heighten the stakes of their internal realizations. The cinematography does not merely document the world, it maps the topography of the character's solitude. By eschewing the frantic, kinetic editing often associated with modern science fiction, Villeneuve grants the audience the space to sit with the existential dread of characters who know their reality is a construct. The unresolved conflict, the precise political future of the replicant uprising, is a masterstroke of restraint. By refusing to show us the war, the film remains tethered to the individual experience. If the movie had ended minutes earlier, focusing only on the revelation of K.'s ordinariness, it would have been a story of crushing systemic indifference. By extending the narrative into his decision to die for a cause that offers him no personal reward, the film pivots from a cold observation of deterministic decay into a profound statement on the dignity of the individual. K.'s death in the snow is the final metaphor for this transformation. He is a synthetic object returning to the Earth, yet he dies having fully claimed his humanity. Ultimately, Blade Runner 2049 does not offer easy catharsis. It presents a world that is objectively worse than the one in which it was filmed, yet it demands that the viewer find hope in the persistence of the individual soul. The legacy of the film is its insistence that even in a society defined by cold, corporate cycles, the capacity to act against one's programming, to perform an act of irrational compassion, is the only meaningful resistance. It leaves the viewer not with answers, but with the haunting, necessary challenge to define what truth we are willing to die for when the world around us provides only synthetic comforts.